All right, I'd like to thank everybody who's joining us for this webinar. We're pleased to talk about our Carsey brief, what do we know about what to do with dams? My name is Catherine Ashcraft. I'm an assistant professor of natural resources and the environment at UNH. I lead the Environmental Policy Planning and Sustainability Lab, and I'm a faculty fellow at UNH Carsey School of Public Policy. Also joining us today is a lead author, Simone Chapman, who's finishing up her master's degree at UNH in natural resources, environmental conservation. In the fall, she's going to be starting a National Academies Gulf Research Science Policy Fellowship with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. And Lawrence Hamilton, professor of sociology at UNH and also senior fellow at the Carsey School of Public Policy. And then our colleague Kevin Gardner is unable to join us today. He's executive Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Louisville, but his heart is still in New Hampshire. And he was the principal investigator on the National Science Foundation funded grant, the Future of Dams grant, of which this research is a part. Next slide, please. So there are many dams in New England. Over 14,000. It's an area where you can see the dots on the map. It's a very dense cluster of dams. These range in size from very small dams that might be in somebody's backyard to very large dams. That could be a hydropower dam, for example, or a large dam on a major river like the Connecticut River. We have a lot of dams just within New Hampshire. So about 4,800 of these, and like the rest of the region, a number of our dams are both classified as high hazard, which means that if they were to fail, they could potentially cause significant economic loss or also loss of life. And then also a lot of our dams are aging and have lived or are approaching the end of their engineering life. And so there are a lot of questions that rise about what to do with these dams. So something has to happen. Either they need to be maintained and repaired or else potentially removed. And so the research that we're interested in talking about today really gets at this kind of question about what should we do about these aging dams. Next slide, please. In my introduction, I mentioned, previous slide, please. In the introduction, I mentioned that this research is part of a larger project called the Future of Dams. So it's a large group of researchers and partners, researchers spanning 6 different institutions across Maine, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. So the University of Maine, Orono, University of Southern Maine, University of Rhode Island School of Design, Keene State College, and the University of New Hampshire. And then also the individuals that are participating in this project have been researching dams from a whole variety of different perspectives, all trying to bring research to bear on this question about what should we do with the dams in this region, given that we expect there's so many decisions that are already currently underway and also that are coming up in the near future. Next slide. With that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Lawrence Hamilton, who's going to talk more about the surveys that were part of this part of the research.
Okay, yes, previous slide. There we go. So we're going to tell you today about some surveys we ran, and the background to those in the first 2/3 in August of 2018. Nature researchers ran surveys by nature surveys and telephone interviews, asking more than 1,500 residents for their opinions about dam removal trade-offs. For example, whether people thought it was important to remove dams to allow free-flowing rivers, or to keep them to preserve industrial history. And on most of these trade-off questions, dam removal turned out to be the most popular choice. But we were seeing a large fraction of people answering that they just didn't know. And so that brought up the question of, well, how much do people know? Because these survey questions seem to be behaving a little bit differently than we expected. Next slide. So that brought up the question of, well, how much do people know? So the is as a follow-up to those February to October to August surveys, we ran another one in October of 2018. And that's the one we'll be talking about today, with 607 interviews. And we introduced the survey by saying that there are thousands of dams and rivers all around New Hampshire. Many of these dams no longer serve their intended purposes for environmental or safety reasons. Some people think that these dams should be removed. Other people prefer to leave the dams in place. So then we followed up with two questions. Have you heard or read about the issue of dam removal? And secondly, with regard to keeping or removing dams in New Hampshire, which of the following statements come closest to your own opinion? So we asked how much they knew and what was their opinion. And to tell you about what we found on these surveys, I'm going to turn it over to the report's lead author, Simone Chapman.
Thanks, Larry. You can go on to the next slide. So now I will be presenting on the key findings from our brief. One of the first key findings come from our first question on how much have residents heard or read about the issues on dam removal. We have found that 85%, which is majority of the residents, majority of the respondents have not heard or read little or nothing about dam removals. Specifically, we see 63% have heard or read nothing about dam removals. You can go to the next slide, please. While we see that majority of New Hampshire residents have not heard or read much about dam removals, 67% consider that old dams should be removed in some or most cases. This is one of our key findings because we see a majority of residents have minimal knowledge on dam removals, but a significant majority of residents still gave an opinion. And only 18% opposed any dam removal and 16% said they didn't know. For the majority who have not heard or read about dam removals, our first question's introductory statement may have provided the most direct information on this issue. You can go to the next slide, please. Another finding comes from the support of dam removals from residents. We see that large majorities, 78 to 85% of those who say they have heard a lot or a moderate amount or little about issues favoring removing dams in at least some cases. From our previous graphic, we saw that our largest group of respondents, the 67% who supported removing dams, however, is those who say they have heard or read nothing about the issue. Go to the next slide, please. New Hampshire residents with no knowledge about dams, which is majority of the respondents, are least likely to support removing dams. This shows from the no knowledge group is at least likely 58% to support dam removals. You go to the next slide, please. Another key finding we saw was New Hampshire residents with more knowledge about dams are more likely to support removing dams in most cases. This figure on the right focuses on the strongest opinion: the old dam should be removed in most instances. This represents the 6% group that believes dams should be removed in most cases. And this shows support for dam removal is higher for people who have heard or read about dam removals and lower for people who have heard nothing. The table ranges from 18% support for removing most old dams among those best informed on the topic to just 3% among the least. And you can go to the next slide. So to wrap up the key findings, we see that Most New Hampshire residents have not heard about the issue of moving old dams, but they expressed opinion when they asked. 67% said they think such dams should be removed in some or most cases, while only 18% do not think any dam should be removed. The next one is the more people have heard or read about the issue, the more likely they are to support dam removal. And then there's widespread lack of awareness and the connection between knowledge and opinions, which underline the need for better communication and outreach to inform the public. You can go to the next slide. I guess to go back to what I just said, a recommendation that we believe would be to have better inform the public would be to enhance public information about dam management options. This includes doing nothing, repairing and maintaining them, or removing them, and the associated short-term and long-term costs and benefits. An example of how we can have better public outreach can include news stories, scientific presentations, and other media attention. And now you go to the next slide. So I want to thank the National Science Foundation, NEST, New Hampshire EPSCoR, UNH Service Center, UNH Carsey School of Public Policy, and most importantly, the residents who have participated in the survey. You can download this brief and the other brief on the right, what to do about with dams, about public opinions on dams, led by my colleague Natalia Diesner at the UNH Carsey School. And we look forward to your questions.
Great. If there are any questions, you can add them to the Q&A box there. And
we have one more slide we didn't get to that might be worth taking a real quick look at. That's the final slide.
absolutely.
And I don't know if Simone would like to talk about this, or this goes to the question of who thought some or most dams should be removed.
Yes. So I know, Larry, you could come behind me and finish up. But yes, this will be looked specifically at certain demographics and their opinion on if dams should be removed. And we found significance for age and ideology. So this just gives a background of the different respondents who said that most dams should be removed. So we see that more males are more likely, the older generation, and then biology, ideology, and education. So Larry, if you want to talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I would just say this: there's no difference by education. People with a lot or a little education equally likely. Majority is about 2/3 of the sample thought that some or most dams should be removed. There is a difference by age, and what stands out there is young adults are more willing to see them go, and middle-aged and older somewhat less willing to see the dams go. So I don't know if they're more cautious and more attached. There's a big gender difference. I don't get that. I don't think we had any theory for why this would be occurring, but it seemed that women were less likely to favor dam removal than men were. On a lot of issues, a lot of environmental issues, it skews the other way around. Women tend to be more protective about the environment compared with men. But on this one, we saw a pattern there. If anybody has any ideas how we would explain that, or what further investigations, I think we'd be interested to hear. And political ideology is very important on a lot of different questions we have surveys, and it was significant here, but maybe not as strong as some other questions. Liberals are a bit more likely to favor dam removal, and conservatives somewhat less likely, with independents in between or moderates in between. So anyway, these are just the kinds of things we also ask on surveys as a follow-up to the basic questions.
Excellent. I don't see any questions coming in. Is there any follow-up that Larry or Catherine or Simone had? to anything?
No, I think I'll just point out maybe, and maybe we can go back just to the previous slide, maybe just as for the final slide. But I think just to talk a little bit in terms of also what motivated this research, there really isn't a lot of information about public opinion about dams at a larger scale, like the state scale, that asks the general public. And so really these two Carsey briefs, we feel, make a contribution to informing decisions about dam management. And so in New Hampshire, we have, like I mentioned at the beginning, different kinds of dams. And some of those are privately owned. Some of them might be owned by a municipality. Some of them are owned by the state. Some could be owned by the federal government. So a variety of different dams with different ownership. These dams influence natural resources that are stewarded in the public interest. And there are different kinds of public funds that can be used to support the decisions for moving forward with removal, for example, or improving fish passage. There's time and effort on the part of our public officials that goes into monitoring the dams for public safety and for environmental conditions and a variety of conditions. So I think having this better picture about public opinion about dams in the state is really important for informing those decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll add something to what Catherine said, which is that when dam issues come up in a community, the people you hear from are often the most motivated. You know, somebody's got waterfront property. And what was unusual about these surveys, they're looking at not at the people who are so motivated to a meeting with opinions already, but a cross section of the general statewide public. So that I think is unique and a different perspective than you might get from the people who are most deeply concerned about a particular piece of water.
All right. If there are no questions from attendees, I just want to thank Larry, Catherine, and Simone for joining us today, and for the viewers online. I think Simone said you can find this publication, both these publications, at carsey.unh.edu/publications. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.